Welcome to Alabama Short Stories, when you're a little behind on your Alabama history. I'm your host, Sean Wright. If you're a fan of college football, then you may have heard mention of the University of Alabama football team winning a big game in the Rose Bowl. Now, if you're an Alabama fan, you probably know all the details, but let me explain for the rest of you. It's 1925 in the South. The Ku Klux Klan is at the height of its popularity, their actions backed by the racist 1901 Alabama State Constitution and Jim Crow laws. The Scopes Monkey trial was held in Tennessee, where a high school teacher was tried for teaching evolution. These events and more painted the South as uneducated and anti-intellectual. Now, even though we did these things to ourselves, we needed something to make us proud. And in the 1920s, the University of Alabama was also building a championship football team. Unlike today, where every stadium in the country seems to have a bowl game where teams with 6-6 records play throughout December, the Rose Bowl was the only bowl game at the beginning of the 20th century, first played in 1902. Teams from around the country had featured in the Rose Bowl game, including USC, Penn State, Notre Dame, Stanford, Harvard, Brown, Oregon, Michigan, and others. The 1925 game pitted Notre Dame's coach Newt Rockne against Stanford's Glenn S. Pop Warner. Notre Dame's Four Horsemen led the team to victory. One thing that sticks out when researching the games is there had been no teams from the Deep South, and there was no interest in featuring one. Don't forget, it had only been 60 years since the Civil War had ended, and people had not forgotten. When Rose Bowl officials were choosing teams for the 1926 game, they asked the University of Washington who accepted. And then they asked Dartmouth, then Yale, then Illinois, then Tulane. None accepted. Only then, with their backs against a wall, they turned to the University of Alabama. The Los Angeles Times referred to the players as swamp students, and humorist Will Rogers referred to the school town as Tuscaloosa. It's going to be tough to change attitudes. Alabama's opponent was the University of Washington Huskies, a true college football powerhouse. Their record was 9-0-1. The only blemish, a 6-6 tie with the Nebraska Cornhuskers. Despite the low score, they had won games that year with scores of 108-0, 59-0, 56-0, 80-7, and 64-2. They must have been asleep during the Nebraska game. The game against the Crimson Tide was expected to be much the same despite Alabama's 9-0 record and only having one touchdown scored against them all season. Alabama left for Pasadena in mid-December on a 4-day train trip. After hanging out with Hollywood stars and Alabama alums living in Southern California for a few days, the team got down to game preparations. 50,000 people were in attendance at the Rose Bowl when they watched the Huskies take a 12-0 lead into halftime. Alabama dominated the third quarter. The stadium was filled with USC fans, and while there were no fans of Alabama at the beginning of the game, they turned to fans once they saw that Alabama could beat USC's conference rival Washington. Alabama won the game 20-19 with stout defense at the end of the game. If you think this Alabama short story is about the exploits of the University of Alabama at the 1925 Rose Bowl, you would be wrong. This short story is about the star player for the Crimson Tide that day. His name is Johnny Mack Brown. Born on September 1st, 1904 in Dothan, Alabama, one of 7 children born to shopkeepers Ed and Maddie, Brown was a star athlete in high school and was nicknamed the Dothan Antelope. It also earned him a scholarship to the University of Alabama. During the 1926 Rose Bowl, Brown caught 2 touchdown passes that day. Washington coach Pop Warner called him one of the fastest football players I've ever seen. That was the last year Brown played for Alabama. The following year, he married his college sweetheart, Cornelia Foster, known as Connie, daughter of a prominent Tuscaloosa judge. Brown got his first brush with Hollywood when the team visited California for the Rose Bowl. The team visited many sites and mingled with Hollywood movie stars. One photo shows Coach Wallace Wade and team members with movie star Bebe Daniels. You must think that Brown must have been impressed by what he saw and wondered if he could be part of that world. He also had a brush with movies in Birmingham. 3 silent films were produced in Birmingham in the 1920s, and when the crew was in town making the movie Men of Steel, they attended an Alabama football game and met the players after the game at Rickwood Field. Alabama played a few games a year at Rickwood Field before Legion Field was constructed. George Fawcett, a character actor in the movie, told Brown to look him up if he ever made it to California. And that's exactly what he did. Brown and his wife moved to California, where Fawcett introduced him to the director Erich von Stroheim. It is said that Stroheim cupped Brown's face in his hand and said, "You could be an actor." It was a whirlwind couple of years for Johnny Mack Brown. His team won the Rose Bowl. He got married. His image was on a box of Wheaties, and he moved to Hollywood to become a movie star. Just one of those would have satisfied most people. He was given a screen test and quickly given roles in movies. His first significant role was in the 1929 movie Coquette, opposite silent film star Mary Pickford in her first talking role. At the time, Mary Pickford was arguably the most famous silent film star, and she was a co-founder of United Artists along with Charlie Chaplin, D.W. Griffith, and Douglas Fairbanks. Johnny Mack Brown's career was off and running. In 1930, he was cast as the star of a Western called Billy the Kid. He continued to work alongside stars Wallace Beery, Jean Harlow, Greta Garbo, Marion Davies, Joan Crawford, and Clark Gable. He was being groomed as a leading man until he was replaced in a film by Clark Gable. With Gable taking the roles that Brown was meant for, he pivoted into Westerns, which seemed to be his true calling, becoming a top B-movie cowboy star. Brown threw himself into the role of a Western movie star. He did his own stunts and horseback riding and became an expert gunslinger and roper. He made 127 Western films with titles such as Fighting with Kit Carson, Rustlers of a Red Dog, Valley of the Lawless, Wild West Days, The Oregon Trail, and Stagecoach Buckaroo. He also starred in Ride 'em Cowboy with Abbott and Costello. And if you're old enough to have had a relative talk about going to the movies on Saturdays in the 1930s and 1940s and watching Westerns, they were probably watching Johnny Mack Brown. Brown was one of the top earners in Westerns from 1942 to 50 as children flooded into theaters. It would not last forever as the bubble burst on B-movie Westerns in 1953. He would continue to act, but the roles were few and far between. He was in one episode of Perry Mason in 1958 and a part of Requiem for a Gunfighter in 1965. His last role was as Sheriff Ben Hall in Apache Uprising in 1965. In an almost 40-year career as an actor, Johnny Mack Brown appeared in 168 movies and shows. Brown had a successful career in Hollywood, and he and his wife Connie lived with their 4 children in a large Tudor-style home in Beverly Hills. When his movie career slowed, he sold the house and moved to more modest accommodations. He took a job as a celebrity host at a high-end restaurant called The Tail of the Cock, located in Studio City. For celebrities and fans alike, it was the place to see and be seen. He may have spent years on the West Coast, but was never forgotten in Alabama, earning honors later in life. In 1969, he was inducted with the inaugural class in the Alabama Sports Hall of Fame, which included Bear Bryant, Shug Jordan, Joe Louis, and others. The state of Alabama's Stage and Screen Hall of Fame inducted him in 2004, and he was awarded the Golden Boot the same year by the Motion Picture and TV Foundation. Brown was the first inductee to the Gun Spinners Hall of Fame in 2003. In 2008, he was inducted into Oklahoma's Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum's Hall of Great Western Performers. Johnny Mack Brown died from kidney failure in 1974 at 70. He's buried in Forest Lawn Memorial Park Cemetery in Glendale, California. Through his success on the movie screen, his most significant role was what he played during the 1926 Rose Bowl. He said it best, "We were the first Southern team ever to participate. We were supposed to be kind of lazy down south, full of hookworms and all. Nevertheless, we came out here and beat one of the finest teams in the country, making it a kind of historic event for Southern football. We didn't play just for Alabama, but for the whole South." Thanks for listening to this episode of the Alabama Short Stories Podcast. I'm happy to announce that Volume 2 of the Alabama Short Stories book is now available and features stories from seasons 4 through 6. You can purchase it and Volume 1 online at Amazon.com and other online retailers. If you'd like to support your local bookstore, you can purchase it through bookshop.org, where your purchases will help financially support independent bookstores. You can find links in the show notes and on the website. See you next time at Alabama Short Stories.